Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists, Michele here, and welcome to our video playlist for chapter 21. We are talking here about the lymphatic system. And when we think about our lymphatic system, if you like, you can also think about your immune system, because we don't really have any other part of the body that's really involved in defense in the way that the lymphatic system is involved in defense. When we talk about defense, what we can really say is that we're going to be filtering pathogens from the blood. So this is really, I think, our sort of primary job of the lymphatic system. We'll see too that when fluid is filtered out of the arterial end of the capillary, and then fluid is brought back into the venual end of the capillary, remember from our chapter 20 discussions, that about 3 liters of fluid that leaves the bloodstream actually moves into the lymphatic system. So another important job is to carry excess fluid. This is about 3 liters from the capillary. You know, and really we should remember it's 3 liters from each capillary bed. So that ends up being quite a lot of fluid back to the blood. This is another important aspect of how we get a flow of fluid across our tissues rather than just like dumping a flood of liquid out of the blood and then just kind of like bringing it back in. We actually have a flow, remember, of fluid across our tissue. And then another important feature or job that we'll see in the lymphatic system, and we'll pick up this idea again in the digestive tract, is that the lymphatic system is going to be critical in transporting dietary fat and lipid-soluble vitamins. And the key thing here is just, you know, our blood is primarily water. Remember, like more than half, slightly more than half of our blood is actually the plasma, and the majority of the plasma is water. And so we have this issue of transporting a non-polar lipid and a polar system. And so what we'll see is you actually package up those fats with some proteins, and this allows it to transport, but then it becomes this like really big package that won't move into the blood capillary, but we can get that into the lymphatic system. And so we'll see that happening. And, you know, the key idea here is that the lymphatic system is another kind of network of vessels. It's another transporting system, and it's ultimately connected back into the bloodstream. So we are going to see that the lymphatic system has a start and it has an end. So it's not a circuit in the same way that the cardiovascular system is, but we'll see that that end point will be the bloodstream. When we talk about the lymphatic system, we will see that it's composed of lymph. And lymph is going to be the fluid once it enters the lymphatic vessels. And we'll see that that fluid originates from the bloodstream. It leaves the arterial end of the capillary. It flows across our tissues. So now it's mixing in with the rest of the interstitial fluid or extracellular fluid. And then some of that fluid, some of that extracellular fluid gets pulled into, I should say, the lymphatic vessel. And as soon as we're entering the lymphatic vessels, we call this liquid lymph. We'll also see that this system has special cells, lymphocytes, which we introduced already. We introduced these already when we talked about our white blood cells. So remember, a lymphocyte is a type of white blood cell, but we did set this cell group apart because we did say they are derived from a separate stem cell. So remember, we had the hemocytoblast dividing into either the lymphoid stem cell or the myeloid stem cell. And we see that the lymphocytes are coming from the lymphoid stem cell, whereas all the rest of the formed elements come from that myeloid stem cell. When we talk about lymphocytes, we're going to be talking about a cell called the natural killer cell. And the natural killer cell is just going to be abbreviated NK cell. This one is going to be involved in what we will be calling immunological surveillance. So we're going to define this more in the future. And then we have a T cell. And the T cell is going to be cell to cell defense, or cell to cell immune response. T cells will actually be killing cells directly killing pathogens or infected cells, mostly killing pathogens. We'll see that it's called a T cell because it's going to mature in the thymus. And we'll see that there are thymosines. Thymosin is a hormone that's going to be involved in coordinating the maturation of those T cells. And then we'll also see a B cell. And it's called B cell because it's going to mature in the bone marrow, which is where we are expecting to see our formed elements being formed, right? And in the case of the B cell, we can think about this as our humoral defense, where the term humoral is talking about body fluids. So ultimately, we'll see the secretion of antibodies. And so I sometimes like to think of that B in B cell as standing for antibody instead of bone marrow. That's just my personal memory device, but it is important to note that it's not actually a B cell that makes antibodies. Instead, it's a cell called a plasma cell. So we'll be talking about that a little bit more as we go through. So far we have the lymphatic system consisting of lymphocytes and lymphatic vessels. So we're going to be talking more about these as we go through. You're going to have a lymphatic capillary. You're going to have the capillary moving into progressively larger and larger vessels. We'll see those vessels that are big start to be called trunks, and then ducts. And then ultimately we'll see this lymphatic vessel dumping into the subclavian vein, so back into the bloodstream. And then I think next, let's just list lymph tissue and organs. So we'll be going through some examples here in detail as we move through our videos. So the lymphatic system is really composed of four things. You have the lymphocyte, you have the lymph, you have the lymphatic vessels, and you have the lymphatic tissue and organs. All right, stay tuned. Up next, we're going to be looking at those lymphatic vessels. As always, take care of yourselves and each other.